Good morning. Thank you all for coming out. We appreciate it. Sorry about the weather. We usually give you a better day, but I don't know. What can I do? So let me just make what are probably a few sort of obvious comments about gun trafficking. If you accept this notion of conventional crime, that being sort of the crime we're used to, violent crime, and sort of the new crime, cyber and whatnot, on the conventional side, I think there's probably little doubt that now and 5 years ago and 10 years ago and some years ago before that, guns, illegal guns, drive a lot of that violence. I mean, so many murders in this town and across the country, and so many shootings in this town and across the country are committed with illegal guns, guns that have ended up in the wrong hands. It is a daunting challenge to try and reduce that. Law enforcement has made some enormous progress in bringing gun violence down. It is really remarkable how much they've been able to do that. As you know, we've done some things at the national level that we think help that, although there's certainly a lot to do. But I thought today we should focus on what is unfortunately a very local problem, which is the continued arrival of illegal guns into our communities, their distribution in various ways, and then, of course, the impact that that has. And there's probably no one better in the city to talk about this than our speaker this morning, Dee Reid, who is in charge of the New York field office of ATF. You all know what ATF is, so I'm not going to walk you through that. It is the tip of the spear, as the Marines like to say. It is the tip of the spear in helping us to fight illegal gun trafficking. Dee has been around ATF for a while. Should we tell him how long? Quite a while. He has served as the ASAC, the Assistant Special Agent in charge of a number of field divisions, including New York, where he's now the director, Tampa and Washington. He also served as Deputy Chief of the Firearms Operation Division of ATF at their headquarters in Washington. He also served as a special agent in ATF's IAD. His career at ATF began in 1990, you do the math, following a tenure in a special place, which I'll talk about in a second. He is a New Yorker through and through, and the more you talk with him, the more you realize what a New Yorker he is, which is terrific. And ever since he's gotten to ATF, he's just been on an upward trajectory. Dee got his Bachelor of Arts in Mass Communications from Herbert Lehman College, his Master's in Human Resource Training and Development from Seton Hall. He is also currently a member of Kappa Delta Pi, the International Honor Society, and a member of NOBLE, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Officials, which is a terrific organization. I've done a lot of work with NOBLE over the years. In some ways, most importantly, he's former NYPD, which I just found out about this morning. He served 3 years in the Bronx, and most fundamentally, he's just an all-around great guy. You know, there are people in law enforcement in this town that are just incredibly solid, incredibly competent, incredibly giving, and super open, and that's Dee through and through. We are delighted to have him in charge of the New York office. He's ushered in a new era of openness and cooperation, and we're certainly delighted to welcome him to the podium this morning. Dee Reid.
There's my partner in crime, Travis, going to help me out today. Let's see if I can get this right and not screw it up. Okay. Thanks, Richard, for those humbling and encouraging words. And you know, we go back a ways, and I certainly appreciate what you do in the foundation and the Citizens Crime Commission. I mean, just an outstanding job for 30 years plus in the efforts for making our city safer, and we certainly thank you for all your efforts. Well, it's always an honor and a privilege to stand in front of a group and talk about what I do. Firearms Trafficking 101 for us is second nature. ATF is at the front line when it comes to violent crime, and the men and women of the ATF New York Field Division Office, let me tell you, are working day and night to eradicate firearms trafficking to New York City. And across the nation, we're working with our partner agencies, certainly, but within ATF more and more. As a matter of fact, next week I'm part of a commission that's going to meet in Philadelphia, and we will be discussing just this very topic of firearms trafficking and how we can better work together and coordinate the investigations through and through. Because we not only want to get the tip of the spear, we want the whole spear. So you want the trafficker, you want the straw purchaser, you want the person that's dealing death on our streets. And this is really what we're facing, guys. When it comes to firearms, there's no shelf life. What we're looking at is, unlike narcotics where you can ingest, inject, smoke, sniff, guns are going to be around for a long time. And they're going to be around until they're recovered. And recovered in a crime is usually the way that we get it. And so, for us, partnerships, very important. And I, as I'm here as the special agent in charge of New York, will make sure that whatever I have, you have, and the law enforcement community, prosecutors, attorneys, will all have our information so that we as one can fight this problem. It's the only way to go about it. ATF is committed to our mission, and we're proud of our partnerships. That's one of our strengths. And the work that we've forged here in New York City, and again, Richard, thanks to you and the Commission, for over 30 years has been outstanding, quite awesome. Let's see if I get this right. As you stated, everyone's pretty much familiar with ATF. And although the focus is going to be on firearms trafficking this morning, let me take a moment to talk about what other jurisdictions that we do cover. And we're not only responsible for enforcing the firearms laws, but we also regulate the industry. And it's through that dual partnership with our agents, special agents, are the criminal investigators, and we have industry operations investigators who have the daunting task of regulating the industry to make sure that they're all up to standards. They conduct compliance inspections, and their main objective during those inspections is to educate and monitor the industry. They also promote additional internal controls on the industry. They're also looking at detecting diversions of firearms and explosives. And they also ensure the safe handling of firearms and explosives materials. There's a wealth of information that these investigators have, and they work within our Crime Gun Intelligence Center to partner up with us so that we can thereby share the information with all of law enforcement, prosecutors, and attorneys. The goal of ATF's illegal firearms trafficking enforcement and industry regulation is to reduce violent crime and protect our nation. We investigate and arrest individuals and organizations who illegally supply firearms, and arrest individuals and organizations who traffic, not only throughout intrastate in New York, but interstate, which is across state lines. We regulate and partner with the industry operations investigators, as I mentioned, and this is something that's ongoing. We work hand in hand, sharing information and making intelligence notifications to other states who may be responsible for bringing or allowing their firearms to come to New York. Let's see, Project Safe Neighborhoods. Let me talk about that for a second. What we have is PSN's been around for a long time, Project Safe Neighborhoods. It's probably been in existence since 2001. It continues to be the country's largest and most visible effort to combat violent crime and gang activity. It's a comprehensive strategic approach to firearms violence, and it targets the gun crime, the offenders, traffickers, and its goal is to make our streets safer. But the plan, like I mentioned, it requires partnership, and that's between federal prosecutors, local district attorneys, communities, community leaders, and everyone all served. The strategy is to invigorate enforcement efforts focusing on both firearms offenses and preventing the illegal diversion of firearms. Let me talk about, pretty much we're going after the narcotics traffickers, the violent gangs, persons responsible for supplying firearms to juveniles. And we do this both domestically and internationally. And currently we have an investigation working with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and that's involving firearms trafficking to and from Canada. And it's mainly towards Canada, but it's through our undercover operatives that are going on that we're making a dent even internationally from New York. Let me take a second to talk about NYBIN. NYBIN is the National Integrated Ballistics Information Network. This is one of the tools that we use in furtherance of firearms trafficking. And just to give you a quick snapshot, you get a shell casing from one scene and a shell casing from another scene. You put them through the IBIS system, which is the technical system that evaluates the correlations of the shell casings recovered from crime scenes. And what we do there is then once we get a match, we could say that this particular gun fired not only at that crime scene, but at another one. And then we link the crimes through further investigation and other technical aspects. For me, NYBIN is a tool that I've used personally. I worked on the Washington, D.C. sniper case, and I can tell you that I was one of the supervisors out there, and I can tell you that without NYBIN, that case would still be going on. This took shell casings from Washington, Seattle, Washington, to Washington, D.C. So certainly if it can do that, it can do it within your precinct and your locale. It's an excellent tool, and we're making strides in it every day. Let's look at comprehensive crime gun tracing. This is the bread and butter for firearms trafficking. And what we're doing there, it's our National Tracing Center down in Martinsburg, West Virginia. And so our Crime Gun Intelligence Center here in New York City works day in and day out with these folks, sharing information, processing the trace leads that are developed in the source states, as well as recovered firearms here in New York City. And they quickly make the links, and what they do is they get that information back out to local law enforcement in the areas that are responsible. It's through that sharing of information, like I said, that really takes effect on things that go on with the firearms trafficking world. It starts with the first trace. The information is very important that gets put into that trace report, and if it's incorrect, our Crime Gun Intelligence Center, our National Tracing Center will reach out to us as they do with all the other field divisions, but we're talking about New York today, so they'll reach out to us directly, and what we'll do is correct the information, reach out to the police departments, and get further information about the recovery of the weapon, maybe the manufacturer if it's missing from the report. Whatever we need to get that information out to the local law enforcement that we're partnered with, we do that on a daily basis, 24/7. Okay, the major issue, where do guns come from, these crime guns that keep occurring? I mean, it's the question that's asked in every crime. How did that guy get the gun? Well, it starts with the first step. Back in maybe 2000 or so, I worked in Philadelphia on a project called Operation Ceasefire, which is similar to Project Safe Neighborhoods. And within there, we were looking at getting 5 to 10 to 15 years mandatory minimum sentences for those individuals who were involved in illegally trafficking firearms in Philadelphia. So let me show you this is the poster that we had, and we used a massive media campaign to get this word out, and it was so effective that as we arrested more and more people, the word got out, and they would come back and tell us, "Hey, I don't want to be ceasefired, and what can I do to help myself out?" So naturally, we developed a lot of informants through there, and we're able to get through other cases as well. Let me show you a quick slide of one of our ads that we ran.
That's not loaded, is it? Oh, my God. Tell me this isn't yours.
Yeah, check it out. You see it.
You're gonna be in jail, and I'm gonna have to raise these kids all by myself. You ain't bringing that in this house.
You want to spend the next 5 years breaking rocks?
You my boy and all, but I can't roll like that. Man, what you doing with that? Boy, you stupid or something? You fool. What's going on with you? I ain't going nowhere with you.
Laws have changed now, man. You gotta pay attention.
Your record of this gun?
5 years, baby.
You got to be out of your mind.
Okay, we had ads running on television, through media, all the time, buses, trains, billboards, and we put it not in the neighborhoods where it didn't need to be. We put it right in the heart of the most violent neighborhoods, and it really made a difference. So it's something a technique that we're looking to employ here. Okay, getting back to firearms trafficking and Project Safe Neighborhoods, it's really the 3 C's are what's applicable here. It's collaboration, communication, and cooperation. Without that, if we operate in silos, we're not going to solve this problem. So what I say is, if your district attorney's office, your police department, in whatever vicinity is operating a firearms trafficking network organization, then you need to be contacting us. And it's not for, we need to be a part of everything. It's for enhancing the case to make sure that we get it from top to bottom. The information that you share with us is confidential, as we share with you. It's the same way. Unless, as whatever police department your disciplines are, we will allow you to share the information with other partnering agencies. Certainly, again, the mission is to stop the illegal diversion of guns into the city. So the paperwork does no good sitting in my cabinet, on my computers, or on my folks' computers. We have to share the information and get it back out. And so I'm here to tell you that that's an effort that's going to be done 24/7 as I'm here. Let's talk about, I'm going to try and skip through some of these slides, otherwise we'll be here all night and Richard would kill me. Looking again, firearms trafficking, we're working alone. None of us will be able to solve the problem. It's too big of a problem to tackle. So we get together as teams, as partners. We can formulate an effective enforcement strategy. And moving past the basics of our partnerships, if we have any chance of battling the gun violence that's here in New York City, and the drug violence which often accompanies it, the criminals are betting against us that we won't share this information. And quite honestly, in that vacuum, they're winning because oftentimes information is not shared. And I'm going to keep harping on that because it is the biggest deterrent when it comes to combating firearms diversion into New York or into whatever state, but particularly here. You have to be cooperative, you have to share, you have to collaborate, and you have to get the information out to us. It's the only way we can help you. Like I said, it doesn't do any good sitting in my desk drawer or in my cabinet. The information has to be shared. That's firearms trafficking. Truly, we have to work together. You can't, like I stated, operate in a silo. You can't have a quasi-gun group, law enforcement initiative, and not expect to miss valuable information. If you're not partnered with all the agencies concerned, then you're missing a component of crime, and the trafficking will continue in one way or another because another head of the serpent will rise and continue to illegally traffic firearms. But this time they're going to be smarter because they've gone through the initial investigation, they've seen their buddy or their partner, co-conspirator, get taken down, and they've learned from that. Back in the 80s and 90s when I was first on the street working firearms trafficking cases, you would get the guy who was with 50 or 100 guns in the trunk of a car driving up from a southern store state. They've adapted and changed, and now they're using different methods. They're using more people and doing other techniques to disguise how they get the firearms trafficking here, the illegally trafficked guns here. But we've been in this game for a long time as well, so we've changed and we've adapted. And through our databases and technical experience, we've been able to more readily identify the trafficking schemes of these organizations. So it's very, again, important for us to be on the same page, working together, working smarter, not harder. And in that fashion, we'd be able to dismantle the more sophisticated firearms trafficking groups. Actions of an incomplete investigation can lead to the rise in thefts of firearms, burglaries in source states at FFLs. FFLs are federal firearms licensees. And it's simply supply and demand. I can go down south, I could buy a gun for $100. I come up here and I can sell it for 3, 4, 5 times that amount. So do the math as it goes up. I then, and from my position in a southern source state, what I do is I elicit the help of my friends. And now all of a sudden you have a firearms trafficking network. And that needs to be checked in the very beginning. And the way that you do that is through firearms tracing. It has to be done all the time. We can make provisions to monitor and restrict some of the traces so as to not go back to the firearms dealer if he or she is a person that you believe could be compromised and working with the network. There are ways to effectively stop a trace and limit it in its powers so that not to divulge any information that would compromise a ongoing criminal investigation. So again, it's important to go after the whole body as opposed to just the straw or the trafficker. If we don't do that, then we're at the risk of creating a market in those source states. And that'll lead to more potential crime, not only there, but say if we're looking at the iron pipeline and you pick a source state like Florida, all the way on up, that trafficker can then distribute guns illegally in all the subsequent states until they reach New York and then continue on with their business. So you have to make sure that you go after the entire criminal organization. We will help you do that. We cannot continue to kick the can down the road, so to speak. It's really just abiding by the 3 C's: communication, collaboration, and cooperation. Certainly, firearms trafficking, what is the motive? You're looking at profit, as I stated, and you're looking at prestige, and you're looking at power. These are the reasons why kids will go down and get engaged in the firearms trafficking business. I've worked cases where the trafficker would come back and tell us once he's arrested that maybe he wasn't that much of a friend to these guys who lived in his neighborhood, and he thought that it was better if he got guns and got into them and stated he was their supply source. So that gave him power and prestige within the community, where previously he had none, and was, quite honestly, was at the risk of getting beaten up by the same gang every day. So that was his in. And it's a story like that is told time and time again in these investigations, and you have to look at it, and we do. We analyze it. We look for the latest trends in their trafficking schemes, and we put that out to our partners. Diversion, again, the movement of a firearm. Firearm is a legal commodity, and it's a diversion into the black market that makes it illegal. 2 major types of trafficking. You have your individuals that will do it, and straw purchasers, opportunists, and you also have FFLs, the Federal Firearms Licensees. With the gun dealers, again, we regulate that industry and we make sure that they're doing the right thing. But maybe I'd say 1% of those gun dealers are problem dealers. We identify them, we notify the field divisions in that locale, and we assist them in their investigations in going after those dealers. And like I said, it's a small number of maybe bad FFLs, but nonetheless, one small bad FFL can do a lot of damage. Source area. Again, it's a location, a state where you can easily acquire firearms. New York City, New York State, very difficult to get a firearms here. You need a permit. But in some source states, you could just walk into the store and produce a driver's license. Next thing you know, after your background check, you're out the door. And that's a serious problem for us, obviously. The trafficker typically would go into the FFL. The form that they use for a firearms transaction is a 4473. And there's a series of questions which we'll go over in a minute. But basically, they can falsify that they're the intended customer for that firearm. And it's not the case, because as we do our investigations, we do our surveillance, what we see on the outside is that no sooner than they leave the store, they're passing off the firearm to their partner, who it was really intended for. That's a straw purchase, that's lying and buying, and it's a federal crime, and you can face 5 years in prison for that. Market area, quite simply, that's us here in New York. Tough to get guns here. And so, like water, they'll go to the place of least resistance, and they'll go down to the source states and traffic the guns to New York. Lying and buying, as I mentioned, that's when the intended person who fills out, completes the firearms transaction record, is not the person that's intended for the purchase of the firearm. Okay. Well, we can skip that. The straw purchases, and that's what I've been talking to you about. 4473 is this is what the form looks like. Series of questions on there. Basically, it outlines the prohibited persons who cannot legally purchase the firearm, and thus go after the straw to acquire the firearms for them. Prohibited persons basically are convicted felons, fugitives, drug users, adjudicated, committed, mental defective. We've seen a lot of this lately with our mass shootings. It's an area that needs to be further developed so that we can curtail this activity. Illegal aliens, dishonorable discharge, renounced U.S. citizenship, court order restraining orders, and convicted domestic violence. All these people are prohibited from buying firearms legally and thus enter the black market. Here's a typical straw purchasing trafficking ring, and you'll see the trafficker at the top will utilize a series of co-defendants or co-conspirators to acquire firearms for him. And like I said before, you would have back in the day maybe one guy bringing up to 50 to 100 guns. Now they're incorporating 4 people to do the same thing. We work with our federal firearms licensees on a daily basis. Like I said, it's only 1% that's really bad, but the majority of the FFLs work with us, share information with us, and they'll even identify when they notice a straw purchase taking place. They'll give us enough time to get down and effect an arrest and thereby shut down that operation. Again, identifying a trafficking operation, the easiest way, the best way, the #1 way to do that is through tracing firearms. And that's where our National Tracing Center comes in, working in conjunction with my Crime Gun Intelligence Center here in New York. They do a lot of intel sharing and a lot of project leads is what we call it. And those are leads that are going to be used to develop cases against the firearms traffickers, again, from the straw to the trafficker and to the person who delivers it here in the city of New York. Starting traces early in investigations is very key. We can get a lot of information as to where that gun is coming from. And again, we could stop it so as to not, if you're in an undercover situation, not infringe the case in that manner. If you think that the FFL, the Federal Firearms Licensee, is maybe a little corrupt, we can stop the trace where we would be able to not notify that person, enabling you to continue with your investigation, but we would have the intel as to where the gun was, primarily coming from. So we can get you that information without compromising your investigation. The mission of the Tracing Center is to trace firearms recovered by law enforcement and to provide trace information to ATF and our other partners. Basically, firearms tracing is tracking the firearm from the manufacturer through each dealer until it's identified to the original purchaser. Real basic, it's the manufacturer, dealer, wholesaler, FFL, and the FFL identifies the purchaser. Benefits of tracing, like I said, it would provide investigative leads during your investigation, and certainly it would identify co-conspirators of your case. Now, for us here in New York, to use Florida as an example again, since I was down there anyway, we would be able to work in conjunction with our Florida division of ATF. This way, it'll save a lot of time and effort, and as far as for trying to acquire further information off of the tracing forms, further information that would be best conducted in those source states, canvassing neighborhoods, interviewing witnesses, we would be able to assist you in that fashion and get you a response in a timely fashion. More benefits, it's a central location, it's a crime gun data, it's an analysis for new leads for investigations and collaboration of information. In your cases, think of a firearm as an informant. You have to conduct the traces and put it into our system. You can either do that by fax, working with the local ATF office, and we also have E-Trace, of course, where you can conduct traces, and we get that information back to you in a timely fashion. This is primarily what a top of a trace report would look like. It would give you the firearms trace history, and it's identified by your personal organization number, and so that's how we're able to batch download the information to you as quickly as we do. Indicators, patterns of illegal firearms trafficking. Again, it's primarily the diversion of guns from southern states to the northern states in an illegal fashion. And what we do is we analyze the traces, the trace information that you submit, and we get that down to our tracing center. We clean the investigation through our databases, and we get the material back to its intended agency. So we're looking at time to crime as an indicator. Time to crime is basically this: the weapon from the original purchaser till the time that it hits the streets and is recovered by law enforcement. So let's say if, for example, I bought a gun over the weekend in Florida, and the gun is recovered in a crime here on Monday morning. That's a short time to crime, and that's an indicator of a traffic gun in most cases. In source areas, again, we'll look to coordinate our efforts with those agencies, and in particular the ATF office of the locale, and thus, as we work our investigation behind the scenes, we provide that information to the agencies that we're working hand in hand with. Multiple sales, that's a multiple sales report that gets generated by ATF. What that does is that tells us that this individual is purchasing more than one weapon. And it's a great indicator because a lot of times you'll see them buying cheap weapons, and those aren't collector's items. Those are weapons that are frequently recovered here in the city. So if we get multiple recoveries associated with the same buyer, what happens there is, again, a strong indicator that this guy is involved in firearms trafficking. The Crime Gun Intelligence Center here in New York is our bread and butter, and when it comes to sharing information. It's our regional Crime Gun Intelligence Center. We employ intelligence research specialists and work with the other intelligence groups across the nation to track down firearms leads. Let's skip that one and go to obliterated serial numbers. This is a major key to a traffic gun. Again, a collector or a person who wants to maintain the firearm for their personal use is not going to destroy the firearm. The only person that's obliterating the serial number is a trafficker. It should be noted that it's not uncommon to have the serial numbers restored. We work hand in hand with the NYPD in this process, and I can tell you that even with a partial number, we can narrow down where that gun came from. So it's important that in your cases, you submit the information off of a oblit serial number gun, because we can still recover the information. I want to say there's other things such as microstamping, and there's other areas where the serial number of a gun is located, and through that fashion, we're able to get you the information. Sometimes guys aren't that smart, and what they're doing is maybe erasing the first serial number that they see, but there's another one. So again, I implore you to submit your obliterated serial numbers, firearms recovered in your areas, and we will be able to get you the information off of that firearm. Also, a big key for us is debriefing armed violent offenders. These are the guys who are telling a story that the gun doesn't complete. You know, every gun tells you a story and has a history, but you got to debrief the people who get caught with the weapons here. And they're a wealth of information for us. Secondary firearms market, these are things that you've heard of, to include gun shows, more than likely, more prevalent again down south. It's an avenue for the illegal traffickers to acquire weapons, sometimes with off books. Gun stores, we have burglaries that are occurring. It's not a frequent problem for us here, but I can tell you down south that it is a major problem, a major issue. And it's not just with the burglaries of the gun stores, but it's also dealing with the burglaries of vehicles. Believe it or not, people would leave their firearm in the car, and the car's unlocked sometimes. It's crazy how there's that sense of, I guess, comfort in the areas that they live, but they don't realize that by not safeguarding that weapon, it's going to be subsequently used in a crime here in a market state. Our agents and inspectors work together along with our laboratory folks to share the information and again, get it back into our crime gun intelligence centers where we can process the information and get that out to the agency that's requesting, the agency that's handling the theft, and also then the agency that's requesting firearms traces. Other sources of used firearms. We're dealing with the internet now. It's all the internet rage. And certainly we have agents and investigators tracking the movement of firearms in this capacity. Newspaper ads are a thing of the past. It's still done. We still monitor that. So it may be a thing that some of these traffickers may be thinking that they're attempting to purchase a firearm from an illegal source when they're actually doing it. They're buying it from us, and we're going to arrest them. 922G is what I told you before in reference to the prohibited persons. And again, convicted felons, persons with felony on probation, parole, illegal aliens, fugitives from justice, persons with misdemeanor crimes of domestic violence. So if an individual had an active misdemeanor warrant on them, we would be able, they're illegally in possession of a firearm federally, and we would be able to arrest that person. And we do a lot of that work when it comes to either the ex-boyfriend or the husband who's not acting right. We come in and charge them with 922G. 924C, that's really our armed narcotics trafficker that we're talking about. And so with you're dealing drugs and you have a gun in your possession and you're using that for protection, we'll come after you and charge you with 924C. It's a mandatory 5-year sentence. And we can skip that one again. Mandatory imprisonment of 5 years for 924C. 924E is the 3-time loser. So this is the person that has 3 previous violent felony convictions or serious drug offenses. Caught with a firearm, it's a mandatory imprisonment of 15 years. As SOP, standard operating procedures for firearms, we should trace all firearms at all times. I know there's some agencies out there that don't trace found guns, but found guns tell a story too. So You have a gun that maybe someone just found in a park. It's going to give us a story. It's going to put us on to not only the trafficker, but the person who bought the weapon, and lead us into another criminal investigation. Let's talk specifically about New York now. And these statistics are from last year, January 1 to 31 of 2014. The top gun that was recovered and traced in New York, we're looking at approximately 7,600 or so weapons. FFLs by location, we're looking, we currently have, and this number fluctuates, so we currently have about 15 FFLs in Manhattan, 14 in Queens. Brooklyn has 8, the Bronx has 3, and Staten Island has 6. And that's through the tough gun laws that we have here in the state. But in upstate, and as you can see in Long Island, Nassau County has 42, Suffolk has 91 dealers, and combination of 133. Just pick the top states, top cities up in upstate. Albany with 6, Rochester 58, Buffalo 8, and Syracuse 18. And these are the dealers, manufacturers, and importers of firearms. And this is probably as recent as maybe a month ago. All right, pistols, that's your most recovered firearm here. And we're looking at about 3,700 guns. Next to that, we'll get revolvers. And then we have rifles, shotguns, and machine guns. But the most popular firearm to be recovered in a crime here is still the pistol. Calibers, the top caliber of gun is a 9mm, followed by the 22 and then 38, and so on and so forth. So your semi-automatic weapon, pistol, 9mm, is your top problem here. All right, possession of a weapon. This is the charges that are most common with the recovery of weapons in New York. And we're really looking at possession of a weapon as a charge that is most frequently charged. Then you have found firearms as the next subsequent charge. And then under that, it's firearm under investigation, which could be a myriad of charges, but haven't been as yet determined at the time of the trace. And here are our problem source states. As you can see, it's pretty much the iron pipeline. It's the East Coast. That hasn't changed in 25 years. Now, you do have some situations with California and Texas. Oftentimes, we'll find that that's just one or two specific entities. And it's really, I can tell you from fact that in some of those cases there, we have military-based trafficking scheme. You'll notice that if you look at the numbers, that New York is its own worst enemy. That's an anomaly that happens in every state because you have your own manufacturers and dealers. That is the first place that is their own worst enemy. But typically, that's a manufacturer's problem and a shipper and a wholesaler's problem. The traffic guns is what we really keep our focus on. And in that manner, what we're doing is we're looking at guns recovered within under 3 months time to crime. As I stated earlier, time to crime is from the last purchaser to the time when it's recovered by local law enforcement. Under 3 months, you see 3 months to under 7 months, there's a sweet spot there that we work these investigations with our local partners from day till night, 24/7. Now you'll notice that the biggest component, the 3 years and over, 3,600 or so firearms recoveries. You know, typically the time to crime on average within the agency is 10 years. Here in New York, the average is 14 years. And we'll look at the possessor of the firearms, 17 and under. What we're really seeing is your sweet spot of 31 to 40 is the age of our possessors here with firearms in New York City. And that's just breaking it down by city. New York City, obviously, 3,500 firearms as a top department that is recovering firearms. And you look at Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, and Albany. FFL thefts, we talked about the burglaries a little bit. As you may be able to see from this slide, what we have is burglary reports are pretty low with a firearms count of 98. So what you're looking at there is you have 5 burglaries and you have 98 firearms recovered from those 5 burglaries, stolen, that is. Being lost right now in shipment is nearly 3,800, nearly 4,000. And that case was it was one case from a manufacturer that skewed the records on that. But primarily, as you can see, it's not really, FFL thefts is not really our problem here. It's more the trafficker. Looking at Firearms Trafficking Task Force, which we've had here in existence with the NYPD for over 25 years. And the men and women of ATF and the New York City Police Department do an outstanding job in working together, in collaborating with their investigative works. And it's a situation that we work hand in hand, day in and day out, to go after those people who are trafficking the guns to New York City. As a result of their dedicated efforts, the elite group of investigators have culminated some stats, so I'll just give you a couple right now. It's since its inception, they've effected over 1,600 arrests, executed more than 213 search warrants, seized in excess of 4,400 firearms, rounds of ammunition, hand grenades, silencers, pipe bombs, and detonators. The men and women of that task force have really done an outstanding job and are responsible for the arrest of persons who were responsible for distributing over 20,000 guns over its history to New York City. Furthermore, they've also identified 44 suspects in murders. The mission of the Joint Firearms Task Force is the comprehensive investigation of the illegal importation, sale, distribution, and criminal use of firearms into New York City. Additionally, these investigators will typically travel to source states to conduct their investigation one-on-one personally with the investigators of that state. They conduct interviews of straw purchasers, they conduct interviews of witnesses, and they also deal with the federal firearms licensees responsible for those weapons reaching New York. It's a partnership that's withstood the test of time, and their efforts, like I said, from the stats that you heard, are phenomenal. In sharing our information with the NYPD, we work hand in hand with their intelligence units and their management staff, and we recently put together statistics about their firearms data. What we've seen so far, I believe this is from last year up until midway of this year, that Brooklyn and the Bronx continue to be the top boroughs for recovered firearms. And here we have, again, as I told you before, the pistol is the most prevalent weapon that's recovered, and it's recovered at a rate of 60%. By caliber, it's a 9mm and the 22. And the reasons for recovery, as we went over, was the possessions of found guns, and the weapon is under investigation. The case is still open. Okay, skip over some of these. The demographics of the possessors and purchasers of the firearms. What we're seeing is the purchasers are mainly male, and the average age of the purchaser is 37, whereas the possessor, in contrast, the average age is 30. So it's natural that you would see that fall off where you have an older person purchasing a firearm, and here in the city we have a lot of kids that are recovering them and using them in crimes and getting caught with them. Top 10 precincts with recovered firearms, 7547, again indicative of Brooklyn and the Bronx being top recovery boroughs. As I stated, my Crime Gun Center is 24/7. It's we do a host of intel work. not only within ATF, but for the other departments. We answer questions, they respond to crime scenes, they conduct research, and they get that information timely out to the department so that they can solve their firearms trafficking investigations in a timely fashion. Collaborative partnerships, centralized crime gun information, and innovative technology. And again, NYBN has been a home run when it comes to solving crime. Collaborative partnerships, as I stated, you got to trace 100% of your guns, even the found ones. They have a story to tell. Our Joint Firearms Task Force has been outstanding over the years. We partner with the National Guard, HIDA, and other entities. Okay, still talking about our Crime Gun Center here, and you know, again, they're available for you guys 24/7. I'll give you the number at the end. A National Tracing Center, the job that they do to get that intel back to you as quickly as possible and to your department and to your detectives is bar none. This is pretty much a typical trafficking scheme. What you'll have is the way that we work these investigations. You'll have the recovery of shell casings at a crime scene. NYPD Ballistics Unit will process that and put it through the NYBN system, the IBIS system. And it'll either come to us at that point in time, we can clean up the information to be able to get that back out to the investigators, or we'll send it down to the tracing center. Once the information is gleaned from the tracing center, they get it back out to us. We send out a project lead to our firearms trafficking group and to the detective that first caught the case, and the end result is arrest and prosecution and conviction. One-stop shopping is the Crime Gun Center. And that's the way we effectively reduce violent crime, is with the sharing of information at the Crime Gun Center. Why go federally when it comes to these investigations? Greater sentences with no parole. That gets the criminals off the streets, and the federal courts oftentimes detain for danger to the community and risk of flight. So that person's not out in the street to intimidate other witnesses in your case. Here's the main gist of the firearms trafficking, guys. You got to connect with your partners, and you got to share information. And again, you got to trace every gun, crime guns, found guns. That's the only way to get after these guys. If you ever want to report information or seek further information, you could always contact 1-800-ATF-GUNS. That's our office down in headquarters in Washington, D.C. Even faster, you hit us up on the website at www.atf.gov. Here's the number for our Crime Gun Intelligence Center, 646-335-9070. Charlie Mulham is the Public Information Officer for New York, and he can be reached at 646-335-9000. John Curtis is our Director of Industry Operations. His folks, like I said, work hand in hand with us to regulate the FFLs and to share intelligence, to give us information that we can get back to you guys so that it would further your criminal investigations in your locales. John can be reached at 646-335-9000. I talked about the trafficking scheme of really groups, but we do also have lone wolves who traffic in firearms, and here's an example of one.
Let's demonstrate. Having a rights policy about dress makes it easy for a student to conceal a weapon and makes it difficult to identify intruders on campus. A dress code can reduce weapons violations, relieve tensions between gangs, reduce disciplinary infractions, and generally improve the atmosphere of the school. Our policy requires that students accompany their shirts, making the belt line visible at all times. Our students may not wear baggy pants, or clothes and insignias that are commonly associated with gang activity. This policy was a collaborative effort between the parents, teachers, and administrators in this community.
And there you go. One-man crime wave there, trafficking crew. I mean, the business of working illegal firearms trafficking, as I've stated, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. You know, it takes a lot of cooperation, a lot of intel sharing, and we're in it for the long haul, guys. We're going to remain engaged, and we're going to take ownership in this, and our business is reducing and eliminating violent crime by stemming the flow of illegally trafficked firearms into our communities forever. There's no place that a trafficker can hide. You know, every gun tells a story, as I've stated, and the 4473 firearms trace record certainly helps us in our investigations. I hope you enjoyed the presentation this morning. I want to again thank Richard and the commission, the Milstein Group. I know Howard couldn't make it today, but certainly for all that you guys do, I want to say thank you. And if I haven't eaten up too much time, I can take some questions. Thank you.
Anybody have any questions?
So my question is, first of all, thank you. I thought it was a great presentation. What about the integration of smart technology, in particular fingerprints? You know, like I just got a new phone 2 weeks ago. If I don't put my fingerprint on it, I don't open it up. You know, I've read some things about creating, you know, it would be very easy, relatively speaking, for manufacturers to create firearms where you'd use your fingerprint and then otherwise it couldn't be used. I think that that would be not only good for safety, but also could have great implications for tracing and things like that. What's your views on that?
Well, certainly I think that it's a step in the right direction. As what we do is firearms enforcement. I would implore you all to reach out to your congresspeople and seek out some legislation of that fashion. Of course, of course.
If I may just augment that answer. We were successful a number of years ago in passing a bill in New Jersey legislature that requires the Attorney General of New Jersey to certify when smart gun technology is available, and then once the AG certifies it, it's mandated sales of guns in the state for civilian use. We exempt the law. Yeah, we exempt the law enforcement. That may be a prototype because the technology is getting better and better.
When you're looking at things of that nature, and micro-stamping, I know is another big key. Certainly, whatever we can use, whatever tool technology that we have and can use to quickly identify how those weapons are falling into the wrong hands, I think it is the way to go. Definitely.
Anyone else?
That was just an incredibly comprehensive investigation. That was great. Thank you all very much. I hope to see you all at our awards gala on the 30th. Please do come to that. And then we have an event coming up on December 11th, which is very different from this event, and I think you'll find that actually quite interesting. But we'll be getting information about that to you soon. Have a great day. Good to see you all. Thanks so much.